Three mafia families, one arranged marriage to preserve the peace, and one woman carrying a secret powerful enough to bring an entire empire crashing down. The harder they try to stay apart, the more fate pulls them together until their love becomes the spark that ignites a brutal war no one can stop. You are listening to a story exclusively narrated on the Dark Romance Stories channel. Relax and step into the world of love stories filled with mystery, emotions, and passion. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment to support us. This content is the property of Dark Romance Stories. Please do not copy or re-upload it in any form. The pager on Elena Vance's hit buzzed at 2:47 in the morning, but it was not the hospital calling. She knew the difference now. The hospital paged in clean digital chirps. This other summons arrived as a single long vibration, low and insistent, less a message than a hand closing around her wrist. She had felt it 4 times in 2 years, and each time the world had narrowed to black cars and quiet men who did not meet her eyes. She read the screen without turning on the light, the Manhattan skyline burning gold across the river. Car downstairs, 5 minutes. Bring the trauma kit. No signature. There never was. But she knew the economy of it, and she knew the car would be a black Maybach with a driver named Matteo, who called her daughteressa, with a respect that unsettled her more than any threat. Elena was 31, top of her class at Columbia, trained in a level 1 trauma center in Newark, and by any reasonable measure, she had thrown her career into a river the night she agreed to become the neutral doctor. She had not known that was what she was agreeing to. It had started with a gunshot wound and a bribe. A young man bleeding out in a delivery van outside the ER doors. 3 men who would not let her call it in. A briefcase of cash she refused. And they left anyway. She saved the boy. She kept her mouth shut. And somewhere in the invisible architecture of the city's oldest families, a decision had been made about her. The truce was older than she was. 3 families who had carved up northern New Jersey decades ago and held the borders through exhausted equilibrium. The piece of scorpions who knew the first to strike would not survive the retaliation. But peace had a logistics problem. Men got shot. Men got sick. Men fathered children they could not acknowledge. And none of them could walk into a hospital and let their blood be logged and reported to the state. So they needed one doctor who belonged to no family, trusted by all 3 precisely because she could be trusted by none. They had chosen her. And the terrible thing was that she had let them. She dressed quickly, black jeans, a gray sweater, the worn leather bag that held far more than any legitimate house call required. Sutures, hemostatic gauze, a portable ultrasound the size of a paperback, vials of things that had no business in a private residence. She had learned to pack for uncertainty. Matteo was waiting when the elevator opened onto the lobby. A mountain of a man in a charcoal suit, his hands folded in front of him with the patience of a church. Daughteressa, he inclined his head. Thank you for coming. Whose blood am I cleaning up tonight, Matteo? He did not answer, which was answer enough. He opened the rear door of the Maybach, and she slid into the leather dark, and the city smeared past the window in ribbons of light as they crossed the river into a part of the night that did not appear on any official map. They drove north into the hills, where the trees closed over the road, and the houses grew higher behind their gates. The Moretti estate sat at the end of a private drive lined with imported cypress, an insistence of old-world memory in the New Jersey dark. She had been here before. The marble foyer, the crystal chandelier, the oil portraits of dead men with the same heavy lids stare passed down like a family curse. What she did not expect was the young man waiting for her at the top of the stairs. Dr. Vance. His voice was low, unhurried, with a faint gravel to it that suggested he had been awake for a long time. I'm sorry for the hour. She had heard about Julian Moretti. Everyone who moved in the shadow of these families had heard about Julian Moretti. The old Don's only son, 34, educated at Georgetown and then at some place in Milan, back now to take up the weight of a name he was rumored to hate. She had imagined someone soft, someone the old world had polished into a lawyer's smile. The man at the top of the stairs was not soft. Tall, dark-haired, in a black shirt open at the throat, he watched her climb toward him with the flat attention of a man who read a room for its exits and weapons. His stillness was not calm. It was control, the kind that costs something to maintain. "Where's the patient?" she asked. "Upstairs, my uncle." A muscle moved in his jaw. "He was shot outside a restaurant in Belleville 3 hours ago. We couldn't move him until now." 3 hours. She was already moving past him, and the outrage in her voice was real. The one thing in this world that was still entirely hers. He could be dead. He's not dead. Julian fell into step beside her, and she felt the heat of him at her shoulder, the presence of him like standing too close to a furnace. "That's why we called you, to keep him that way." The uncle was on a table in the wine cellar, a place chosen for the drain in the floor. Elena thought about the entry wound below the collarbone and the exit that had missed the artery by the width of a prayer. And she worked, and Julian Moretti stood in the doorway and did not look away from her once. An hour later, the uncle was stable, sedated, breathing even, and Elena washed her hands and felt the adrenaline drain out of her in the shaking aftermath she had never learned to control. Julian was still there. "You're good," he said. "I'm expensive." She dried her hands. "I'll need to see him again in 2 days. If he spikes a fever, you call me immediately, not in 3 hours. You always talk to us like this." She looked at him then, really looked, and found him already studying her with an intensity that made her aware of her own pulse. Most of these men treated her like furniture that happened to be useful. Julian Moretti looked at her like she was the only real thing in a house full of ghosts. "I talk to everyone like this," she said. "That's the whole point of me. I don't belong to you." Something flickered in his expression. Not offense, something closer to recognition. "No," he agreed quietly. "You don't." She should have left it there. She gathered her bag and let Matteo drive her home through the paling dark, and she told herself the way her skin still held the memory of his attention meant nothing at all. She was already lying to herself, and she knew it, and she did it anyway. The Rossi called her 9 days later. Their world was different from the Moretti world, and Elena had learned to read the difference the way she read a patient's vitals instantly, without conscious thought. The Moretti loved the old symbols, cypress trees, oil portraits, a wine cellar with a drain in the floor. The Rossi loved money the way it looked now. Their compound was glass and steel set into a bluff above the Palisades. A house that seemed to hang in the air over the river, all clean lines and cold light. A place designed by someone who had been told what wealth was supposed to look like in a magazine. Don Carmine Rossi was 71 and dying of a heart that had beaten too hard for too long. And Elena was the only person outside his immediate family who knew it. That was the weight she carried now. Not the gunshot wounds, those healed or they didn't. And either way, they were finished business. It was the other things, the slow secrets, the Don's failing heart, the Banano underboss's diabetes he refused to manage because insulin dependency looked like weakness. The Moretti Consigliera's wife, who had come to her once terrified and alone, needing a procedure she could not have in any place that kept records. And the children, that was the worst of it, the thing that lay coalesced in her chest at 3 o'clock in the morning. She knew which men had fathered which children with which women who were not their wives. She had delivered 2 of them. She had signed no birth certificates, and the mothers had gone home to apartments paid for in cash, and the men had sent flowers and never come. She had begun to understand, a living archive. Every family's shame was written in her memory, indexed and cross-referenced, and she was the only volume in the library. The first call had been legitimate. His uncle's fever, exactly as she'd warned. She talked him through the antibiotic protocol over the phone at midnight, her voice clinical, her heart doing something unprofessional at the low sound of him saying her name. The second call had been thinner, a question about the uncle's mobility that could have waited for the follow-up appointment. She had answered it anyway. The third call had no medical pretext at all. "I wanted to know how you were," he'd said, and the honesty of it, the sheer nakedness of a man like him admitting to a what had left her standing in her kitchen with the phone against her ear and no idea what to say. "I'm fine, Mr. Moretti." "Julian, that's not a good idea." "Probably not." A pause, and she could hear him breathing, could picture the stillness of him. "Tell me to stop calling and I'll stop." She should have. She had rehearsed the sentence. It was a simple sentence for words. "Please stop calling me." And she stood there with it fully formed behind her teeth, and she could not make herself say it. "Good night, Julian," she said instead, and hung up, and hated herself for the way she smiled at the dark window afterward. Now in the Rossi house, she finished her examination of the dying Don, and updated his medication, and packed her bag under the watchful eyes of 2 soldiers, and she was almost to the door when a young woman intercepted her in the glass hallway. Daughteressa Whitfield. The woman was perhaps 26, dark-eyed, beautiful in a hard, polished way, dressed in cream cashmere that probably cost more than Elena made in a month. "I'm Francesca, Carmine's daughter. Miss Rossi." Elena shook the offered hand. It was cold. "My father speaks highly of you. He says you are discreet. Discretion is the whole job." "Yes." Francesca's smile did not reach her eyes. There was something behind them Elena could not name. A coiled watchfulness, a mind running calculations. "I imagine you know a great deal about a great many people." "I know a great deal about hearts and lungs and wounds. That's all I let myself know." "How careful of you." Francesca tilted her head. "You'll have heard perhaps that I'm to be married." Elena had not heard. She kept her face still. "Congratulations to Julian Moretti." Francesca watched her closely as she said it, and Elena understood with a cold slide of comprehension that this entire conversation had been engineered to watch her face at exactly this moment. It's a very important marriage. It will make the peace permanent. 2 families joined by blood instead of by fear. A pause. "I would hate for anything to complicate it." "I don't see how a doctor could complicate a wedding," Elena said. "No." Francesca's smile widened, and it was beautiful and terrible. "Neither do I. Good night, daughters. Drive safely. The road down the bluff is treacherous in the dark." Elena walked out into the cold and led Matteo. No, not Matteo. A different driver, a Rossi man, hold the door for her, and she sat in the dark of the car with her heart pounding and understood 2 things with perfect clarity. The first was that Julian Moretti was engaged to be married, and that this had been arranged before she ever set foot in his father's house, and that whatever was happening in her chest when he said her name was a door she needed to close and lock and never open again. The second was that Francesca Lucy's had looked at her the way a chess player looks at a piece she has already decided to sacrifice. The car descended the treacherous road in the dark, and Elena watched the black river slide by below, and she did not close the door in her chest. She meant to. She fully meant to. She simply catastrophically did not. He came to her clinic on a Tuesday. She kept a small, legitimate practice, a concession the families insisted on because it explained her, a paper self that paid taxes and looked to the ordinary world like nothing more than a private physician with a discreet clientele. 2 exam rooms, our receptionist named Mart who asked no questions, a window onto a parking lot, and a strip of gray sky. Julian Moretti did not belong in the ordinary world, and he knew it, and he came anyway. "You don't have an appointment," she said, standing in the doorway of the exam room, where Martyr had, with a look Elena would deal with later, deposited him. "I made one under a different name." He was sitting on the paper-covered table like it was a throne. His suit jacket off, his shirt sleeves rolled to the forearm, and Elena's eyes went to the ink there before she could stop them. The edge of something dark disappearing under the fabric, a mark she'd glimpsed the night in the wine cellar and not let herself examine. "I told your receptionist I have chest pains." "Do you have chest pains?" "Constantly," he said, and held her gaze. And the word had nothing to do with his heart's electrical function, and both of them knew it. That's not funny. I'm not laughing. He wasn't. That was the thing about him she was beginning to understand. The danger of him lived precisely in his refusal to perform. He said outrageous things in the flat, quiet voice of a man reading a shopping list, and it made every word land like it had been considered and meant. Examine me, doctor. I came all this way. Take my pulse. Your pulse is fine. How do you know? You haven't touched me. She should have thrown him out. She was aware in some clinical and detached part of her brain of the exact sequence of professional actions that the situation demanded, and she watched herself fail to perform a single one of them as she crossed the room and picked up his wrist. His pulse was not fine. It was fast, and it jumped under her fingers when she touched him, and he watched her count it, and both of them knew what the number meant. 92, she said. Is that bad for a man sitting still? She let go of his wrist. It cost her something to let go. It means you're agitated. I'm not agitated. He said it, looking directly at her, and the correction in his voice was gentle. I'm here. The silence in the room had weight. Outside the window, a car door slammed. Someone left. The ordinary world went on being ordinary, and inside the room Elena stood a foot away from a man she had no business wanting, and felt the whole edifice of her carefully maintained neutrality begin to hairline crack. You're getting married, she said. It came out lower than she intended to Francesca Rossi. She told me herself 9 days ago. Something closed in his face. Not surprise, he'd known she would learn it. Something more like grief that he'd been caught before he was ready. Yes, he said. Then what are you doing in my exam room, Julian? He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, it was not the answer she expected, and it undid her more thoroughly than any seduction could have. My father was a killer. His father was a killer. Every man whose portrait hangs in that house put people in the ground and called it business. And they raised me to be the next one. He looked at his hands. I don't want to be the next one, Elena. I want to be the last one. To take everything my family built on blood and turn it into something that doesn't bleed. The marriage to Francesca is how I do that. 2 families, no more war. And in 20 years, maybe my children don't know what it's like to have a doctor so their uncle up in a wine cellar. That's a good reason to marry her, Elena said. Her throat hurt. It's the only reason I'm marrying her. He raised his eyes to hers. I don't love her. I've met her 4 times. She looks at me like I'm a murderer. And I keep finding excuses to sit in a parking lot clinic because the only place in my entire life where I feel like a person instead of a name is the 2 feet of air around you. So that's what I'm doing here, doctor. I'm being a person for an hour before I go back to being the piece. She did not touch him. She wanted to with a want that frightened her. But she did not touch him because she understood that if she touched him now, she would not stop and both of their lives would come apart at the seams. You can't come here anymore, she said. I know. I mean it. Not for real appointments, not for fake ones. If anyone in any of these families thinks I'm not neutral, Julian, do you understand what happens to me? That reached him. She saw it land, saw the calculation in him snap from one of fear, and for the first time the flat control cracked, and she glimpsed the thing underneath it. Not coldness at all, but a banked and dangerous heat. Nothing happens to you, he said, and his voice had changed entirely, gone low and absolute. Do you hear me? I would burn all 3 families to the ground before I let anyone touch you. That's exactly what I'm afraid of, she whispered. He left. He stood and rolled down his sleeves and put on his jacket and became once more the air, the piece, the name. And at the door he stopped and did not turn around and said, 92. You should know it was 92 before you touched me too. Then he was gone, and Elena sat down hard on the exam table, where the warmth of him still lingered in the crackling paper, and she put her face in her hands, and she did not cry, because she had trained for years not to cry. But she came closer than she had in a very long time. He came back the next Tuesday, and the one after that. She never once threw him out. The Tuesdays became a season. Elena measured time by them now, though she would not have admitted it under oath. Monday was the long, slow climb toward the thing she was not supposed to want, and Wednesday was the descent away from it, and in between there was 1 hour in a parking lot clinic when Julian Moretti sat on her exam table and told her the truth about his life. And she told him the truth about hers. And neither of them touched the other, and it was the most intimate thing that had ever happened to her. The cage had bars she'd stopped being able to see, and the most dangerous of them was the one Don Salvatore had named in his silk bed. You know too much. Every Tuesday made her more valuable and more fragile at once. Every secret she carried was a coin, and she had never spent one, and the not spending was the only thing keeping her alive. But a full vault attracts thieves, regardless of whether the owner ever touches the gold. It came home to her in the second week of a cold October. The Falcone family called for the first time in months. She'd never liked the Falcone work. The Moretti were courtly, the Lucas modern, the Falcone simply dangerous. A family that had never made the transition from street to boardroom. Old Don Falcone was a stroke-diminished ghost now, and real power had drifted to his son Lorenzo, 30, wolfishly handsome, with a temper the whole underworld stepped around. The patient this time was a soldier with a knife wound, routine, and Elena stitched him in a back room of a nightclub the Falcones owned in Newark. The bass thudding through the walls like a second pulse. She was packing up when Lorenzo Falcone came in and shut the door and leaned against it and looked at her the way a man looks at a locked safe he's decided he has the right to open. He rolled the word around like he was tasting it. You take care of everybody, don't you? Us, the Moretti, the Lucas. He smiled. You know all our little problems. I know your soldier will need the stitches out in 10 days. That's not what I mean. He pushed off the door and crossed to her too close, and she made herself hold still because stepping back was blood in the water with a man like this. I mean, you're a very well-informed lady. I mean, if a man wanted to know something about the Moretti, something private, something a man could use, that man might think a doctor who's been in and out of that house was worth having a conversation with. I don't discuss patients, Elena said. Any patients. That's the arrangement. It's the only reason any of you trust me, including you. The arrangement. He said it like it amused him. The arrangement's a piece of paper nobody ever signed. Sweetheart, it holds because everybody's scared of everybody. You know what happens to arrangements like that? Enlighten me. They hold right up until they don't. He reached out and before she could react, tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear, and the intimacy of it was a threat more explicit than a gun. And when they don't, the smart people are the ones who already decided which side they're standing on. You want to think about which side you're standing on, daughteressa. Because neutral is a real comfortable place to be right up until it's the loneliest place in the world. He left. The bass thudded on. Elena finished packing her bag with hands that were almost steady, and she walked out through the flashing dark of the club, past bodies moving to music she couldn't hear over the roar of her own blood. And she got into the car, and she did not tell the driver anything was wrong. But she understood now what Salvatore had meant and Francesca and the whole architecture of dread she'd been living inside without letting herself feel it. She was not a doctor who happened to know secrets. She was a repository. And the thing about a repository was that its value was highest to whoever was willing to break it open. She called Julian that night. She'd sworn she wouldn't, and she did anyway, because he was the only person in her impossible life she could say it to. Lorenzo Falcone threatened me tonight, she said. Not directly, but he wanted me to know I'm a resource. He wanted me to know the piece is thinner than everyone pretends. The silence on the line changed. She could feel it change, feel the temperature of it drop. And when he spoke, his voice was the flat, absolute thing she'd heard once before in the exam room. The voice from under the control. What did he touch? What? You said he wanted you to know men like Lorenzo don't just talk. What did he touch? Elena. She hadn't meant to tell him. My hair. He tucked my hair behind my ear. It was nothing. It was just who it wasn't nothing. A long breath. Listen to me. You don't go to the Falcone Club alone again. If they call, you call me first. And Matteo drives you and he waits in the room. I don't care what it does to your neutrality. Your neutrality doesn't matter to me if you're not breathing. Julian, I mean it. And then lower in a voice she'd never heard him use. A voice with the floor gone out from under it. I can't do this if something happens to you. I can hold all of it together. The families, the marriage, the peace, all of it, but not if you're not somewhere in the world being alive. Do you understand what I'm telling you? She understood. God help her. She understood exactly. Yes, she whispered. Neither of them said the word, but it sat on the line between them in the dark, unspoken, and enormous. And after they hung up, Elena lay awake watching the city burn across the river and knew that the cage had a name now, and the name was love, and there was no lock in the world that could hold it. The engagement party was held in November in a ballroom on the top floor of a Manhattan hotel that the Moretti family did not own, but might as well have. And Elena was invited because, of course, she was invited. That was the cruelty of her position. She could not decline. A neutral doctor who snubbed a peace-cementing engagement between two of the three families would be making a statement, and statements were dangerous. And so she put on a black dress she'd bought for a wedding she'd never attended and let Matteo drive her into the city and rode the elevator up into a nightmare made of chandeliers. The room was beautiful. That was the obscenity of it. Gold light and white orchids and a string quartet. And everywhere she looked, the most dangerous men in 3 states in tuxedos, laughing, drinking champagne, their wives in jewels that had been paid for in ways no one at the party would name. She'd stitched half these men. She delivered secrets for a third of them. She moved through them like a ghost who knew where all the bodies were buried because she did. And at the center of it on a low D's stood Julian Moretti and Francesca Lucas, and they looked, she had to admit, like the future the families wanted. He in black, she in silver, both of them beautiful and cold. A merger given human form. He found her with his eyes across the room within a minute of her arrival. She felt it like a hand on the back of her neck. He did not come to her. He could not. But he found her and held her gaze for 1 second too long, and then turned back to the woman he was going to marry. And Elena drank her champagne too fast and went to find a window. You look like you're at a funeral, Francesca said, appearing beside her. She had the gift of appearing, which, I suppose, for someone it is. It's a beautiful party, Elena said. It's a beautiful lie. Francesca sipped her drink and looked out at the city. Up close, at the center of her own triumph, there was something brittle in her. Something Elena's clinical eye read as strain badly hidden. You know what this is, Doessa? All of it. It's theater. A play where all performing so nobody has to admit that the piece is held together with fear and appearances. And if any single person decided to stop pretending, the whole thing comes down. Then why perform it? Because the alternative is war. Francesca's smile was thin. And in war, people I love could die. So I'll marry the Mafia Heir and smile for the photographs and let everyone believe I'm the happiest woman in New Jersey. She turned to Elena and her dark eyes were suddenly disconcertingly direct. Wouldn't you to protect the person you loved? Wouldn't you do anything? The question was too sharp to be casual. Elena felt the trap in it without being able to see its shape. I don't know what I'd do, she said carefully. I've never loved anyone enough to find out. Liar, Francesca said softly, almost kindly, and drifted away into the gold light before Elena could respond. Elena stood at the window for a long time after that, her heart pounding, replaying the conversation, trying to understand what Francesca had been fishing for and what she'd caught. To protect the person you loved, wouldn't you do anything? There had been real feeling in it. Francesca Rossi, engaged to be married in 3 months, had spoken about love with the desperation of a woman who was in it, and it had not. Elena was almost certain. Then about Julian. She was still turning it over when a hand closed around her elbow, and she knew the weight of it before she turned. Dance with me, Julian said. Are you insane? Half this room has watched me stitch their brothers, which is exactly why it's safe. His voice was low, his face arranged into the pleasant nothing of a host doing his duty. The heir dances with the family doctor at his own engagement party. It's polite. It means nothing. Everyone will forget it in an hour. His hand tightened just slightly. Please. One song. I've been in this room for 3 hours pretending, and I need 3 minutes that are real, or I'm going to lose my mind. She should have said no. She said yes because she was made of the same weakness he was. And he led her to the floor and put his hand at the small of her back, and they moved to something slow the quartet was playing. And for the length of one song, the ballroom and the families and the fear all fell away. You're shaking, he murmured. I'm terrified. This is the most dangerous thing I've ever done. And I do dangerous things for a living. I've got you. His hand pressed warm against her spine. Nobody's watching. They're all too busy performing to notice anyone else performing. Francesca's watching. Francesca's always watching. Something moved through him at the name, and she felt it in the sudden tension of his hand. What did she say to you? She asked if I'd do anything to protect someone I loved. Elena looked up at him. Julian, I don't think she wants this marriage. I think she's performing harder than anyone in this room, and I think she was warning me about something or testing me, and I can't tell which, and it scares me. The song ended. He stepped back the correct distance and bowed slightly. The perfect host, and only his eyes stayed on hers a moment too long. Thank you for the dance, Dr. Vance, he said, for the room. Congratulations on your engagement, Mr. Moretti, she said, for the room. And under the room, in the 2 feet of air between them, that was the only country either of them was a citizen of. He said so quietly she barely heard it. It should be you. Then he was gone back into the gold and the lie. And Elena left the party 10 minutes later and rode down through the belly of the beautiful hotel and out into the cold. And she did not cry in the car, and she did not cry in the elevator. And she made it all the way to her own bathroom before the thing in her chest finally broke. She did not yet know she was already 2 people. She would not know for 11 more days. She knew before the test told her. That was the thing no one warned you about. The way the body announced itself in a language older than any diagnostic, a tiredness that sleep didn't touch, a tenderness. A morning 3 days running when the smell of coffee she loved, coffee she drunk black through 100 overnight shifts turned her stomach in a way that had nothing to do with any virus. She was a doctor. She stopped lying to herself faster than most women would have. She bought the test at a pharmacy 2 towns over where no one knew her face, and she took it in the bathroom of her apartment, with the city burning across the river, and she sat on the edge of the tub and watched 2 lines resolve out of the white like a verdict. Then she sat there for a very long time. She did the math because the math was the only solid thing in a spinning world. 11 days since the engagement party, 6 weeks then, more or less, since the one night she had let herself stop being neutral. It had happened after the Lorenzo Falcone threat, after the phone call, the flat, absolute voice. I can't do this if something happens to you. He had come to her apartment, the first and only time he'd ever come, breaking every rule they'd built, because Matteo had reported that a Banano car had been seen on her street, and Julian had not been able to breathe until he saw with his own eyes that she was alive. He'd meant to check on her and leave. She'd meant to let him. Neither of them had left anything. They had stood in her kitchen, and the pretense had simply run out, the way water runs out of a cracked glass, all at once and completely, and he had said her name like it was the only word he knew, and she had crossed the 2 feet of air that was their whole country. And after that there were no more rolls for one night in the dark above the river. He'd been gone before dawn. They'd never spoken of it directly since. A look, a silence, a hand that lingered a half-second too long on Tuesdays, because to speak of it was to admit it was real. And if it was real, then it was a catastrophe, and they had both chosen, without discussing it, to survive by not looking directly at the sun. And now there were 2 lines on a test, and the sun was inside her. And in 2 weeks Julian Moretti would stand in a cathedral in front of 3 families and formally, publicly, irrevocably become engaged to be married to Francesca Lucas. The private engagement made a matter of public record and honor, the ceremony that transformed an arrangement into a binding of blood that could not be undone without spilling it. 2 weeks. Elena stood up eventually because sitting on the edge of a tub was not a plan, and she washed her face and looked at herself in the mirror and tried to find the doctor in there, the woman who assessed and decided and acted. The doctor looked back at her hollow-eyed and offered no diagnosis because there was no protocol for this. There was no clinical pathway that led out of a room where the man you loved was 2 weeks from a wedding that would end a war. And you were carrying the one fact in the universe that could stop it. And stopping it might start a different war, a worse one measured in bodies. Because that was the thing she understood, standing in her bathroom at 11 at night. This was not a story about a woman and a man and an inconvenient pregnancy. If it were only that, it would be the simplest thing in the world, painful but simple. This was a story about a peace treaty written in the language of marriage, and she was holding a secret that could tear the treaty in half. If she told Julian, he would not go through with the wedding. She knew him well enough by now to know that with certainty, and the certainty terrified her. He would not marry Francesca while Elena carried his child. He was too much himself for that. And when he refused the marriage, the Lucys would take it as the deepest possible insult, a Mafia Heir humiliating a Rossi daughter at the altar of the peace. And the fragile equilibrium that had held for a decade would shatter, and the wine cellars would fill with the wounded, and she, the doctor, would be sewing them up by the dozen, while she carried the reason for all of it under her heart. And if she didn't tell him, she would watch him marry another woman, and she would raise his child alone in the shadow of families who executed liabilities. And every one of those families would eventually learn to count. A doctor with a child of no named father, men who had spent their whole lives calculating leverage, would look at that child and do the arithmetic, and they would arrive at an answer. And the answer would put a target on a person who did not yet have a heartbeat you could hear without a machine. Either path led to blood. That was the trap Francesca had been circling at the party without knowing its true shape. Wouldn't you do anything to protect the person you loved? Elena understood the question now in her own body. She would. She already knew she would. She just didn't know what the anything was. She did not call him. She wanted to so badly her hand actually lifted the phone from the counter, and then she set it down again because she understood that this was the one secret she could not carry the way she carried the others. This one was not in her memory. It was in her blood. It would grow whether she spoke of it or not, and it would become visible, and time was the one enemy she had never learned to sew shut. She had 2 weeks. 2 weeks to decide whether to detonate the peace to save the man or protect the peace and lose him. And either way, to figure out how a woman who had built her whole identity on belonging to no one was going to survive belonging now so completely to a life she had never planned and could not give up. Elena Vance lay down on her bed without undressing and put her hand flat against her stomach, over the secret, over the future, over the small, impossible fact that had just made her the most dangerous woman in New Jersey for an entirely new reason. Okay, she whispered to the dark, to the city, to the 2 lines, to the child. Okay, we'll figure it out. I promise you, we'll figure it out. She did not sleep. Across the river, the towers burned gold and cold, indifferent, beautiful, and somewhere out in the dark, the 3 families slept the untroubled sleep of men who did not yet know that the peace they'd built had just been quietly, invisibly undone. Not by a bomb, not by a betrayal, but by 2 lines on a test in a bathroom in Hoboken. The clock had started. It would not stop for anyone. She almost told him on the Tuesday he came as always under a false name and sat on the paper-covered table, and the first thing he said was, "You look tired," and the tenderness in it nearly finished her. "I'm always tired. I'm a doctor." "No." He tilted his head, studying her with that unnerving attention. "This is different. Something's wrong. Tell me what's wrong and I'll fix it. I'm pregnant." The words were right there, formed and ready. And she looked at his beautiful, tired, hopeful face, the face of a man who believed he could marry his way to peace, and understood that if she said then, everything he was building would come down, and she would be the one who brought it down. She wasn't ready because she loved him, and she was not yet willing to hand him a choice with no good answer. "I'm fine," she said. "The banana business has me on edge, that's all." He didn't believe her, and she watched him decide out of some grace she didn't deserve not to push. "The formal engagement's in 11 days, he said quietly. "After that, there's no turning back without a war." He looked at his hands. "I keep thinking there has to be another way, some way to bind the families that doesn't cost me." He stopped. "That doesn't cost you what you. Every plan I've ever made costs me you. There's no version of peace that has you in it, and I can't stop trying to find one, and it's driving me insane." She stood very still, the secret pressed against her ribs like a second heart. "Julian," her voice was steady, which was a miracle. "If you had a reason, a real reason, something that made the marriage impossible, would you take it, even if it meant war?" He looked up sharply, and for a moment she thought he'd read it in her, thought the whole thing would come out in the gray light of the exam room, but he only said, "I don't get reasons. Men like me don't get to be rescued by reasons. We make the hard choice and we live with it." A pause. "Why do you have one?" The moment stretched. Outside, the ordinary world laughed and slammed its car doors. "No," she said, "I just wanted to know what kind of man you are." "And the kind who'd want the reason," she said softly, "and refuse it anyway, which is the worst kind for me." He left that day without touching her, as always. And as always, the not touching was its own kind of touching. And Elena stood at the window and watched his car pull out of the lot and pressed her hand to her stomach and thought, "Not yet. Not yet, but soon. I can't hold this much longer." She had 11 days. She did not know that she had far fewer than that before the choice would be taken out of her hands entirely. The Lucchesi called her the next night. It was Francesco, which was strange. The family summons came through drivers and soldiers, never through the principals themselves, and never through the women. But it was Francesco's voice on the line. And it was not cold now. It was frayed. "Daughteressa, I need to see you privately, not at the house. Somewhere no one knows." Miss Rossi, I'm not sure that's please." The word cost her something. Elena could hear it. "I need a doctor I can trust, and you're the only one who belongs to no one. I need a breath. I need something taken care of." Quietly, woman told on. "No one can know. Not my father. Not the Moretti, no one." Elena closed her eyes. She knew this call. She'd had it before from the Genovese consigliary's wife, from 2 others. She knew what taken care of quietly no one can know meant. And she knew the shape of the desperation behind it. "Where?" she said. They met in a diner off Route 17, the kind of place with vinyl booze and endless coffee, where 2 women could sit in a corner at 10 at night and no one would look twice. Francesca came without a driver, which was itself extraordinary. A Rossi daughter alone in the world was not a thing that happened. And she slid into the booth across from Elena with a scarf over her hair and her beautiful face bare of makeup. And she looked for the first time like what she actually was, 26 years old and terrified. "I'm not sick," she said before Elena could speak. "I want to be clear. There's nothing wrong with me. I need you to understand that first." "Then what do you need, Francesca?" Francesca wrapped both hands around her coffee cup and looked at the steam rising off it. And when she spoke, it came out in a rush, a confession held too long under too much pressure. "I'm in love," she said. "Not with Julian. God, not with Julian. He's fine. He's decent, but he's a stranger. He's a treaty in a suit. I've been in love since I was 19 with someone I'm not allowed to want. Someone my family would kill him for. Someone who's on the wrong side of everything." Her eyes came up dark and burning. "And in 11 days, I'm supposed to marry the Mafia Heir and cement a peace and spend the rest of my life smiling in photographs while the person I actually love watches from across a room at parties like the one you saw me at." Elena's mind connected things she'd sensed and not understood. The strain behind the triumph, the woman who made things happen so she could control how they fell apart. "Why are you telling me this?" she said carefully. "What do you actually need from me?" Something calculating flickered behind Francesca's fear, and Elena realized, too late, always too late, that even this confession was partly a performance. "I need to know if you're really neutral," Francesca said quietly. "That's all. I need to know if the neutral doctor is really neutral or if she's already chosen a side, because I've seen the way Julian Moretti looks at you, daughters. The whole room saw it, and I need to understand what that means for the 11 days I have left to fix my life." The blood went cold in Elena's veins. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. "Of course you don't." Francesca smiled, and the fear was gone from her face now, folded away, replaced by something hard and clear and frightening. "Neither do I. We're two women who don't know anything having coffee." She stood, dropping bills on the table. "Thank you for coming. It's good to know where you stand." At the edge of the booth, she paused and added almost gently, "You should be careful, Elena. A woman who knows too much and loves the wrong man, that's a very short life expectancy in my world. I'd hate to see it truly." She walked out into the parking lot and got into a car that had, Elena now saw, been waiting the whole time. A dark car with a man at the wheel. Elena couldn't make out and was gone. Elena sat alone in the vinyl booth with 2 cups of cooling coffee and understood that she had just been read like a book by someone far better at this game than she was, and that Francesca Rossi had learned exactly what she'd come to learn, and that whatever the woman was planning, Elena had just handed her a crucial piece of it. She had 11 days. She had a secret growing under her heart, and she had just been marked unmistakably as a player on a board she'd spent 2 years pretending she was only cleaning. Julian knew something had changed. He couldn't name it, but he could feel it the way he'd learned to feel a room before he walked into it, and it was making him reckless. He sat in the back of the Maybach outside her building at midnight, which was insane, which broke every rule he'd built, and he watched the light in her window and did not go up. Matteo, in the front seat, said nothing. Matteo had been his father's man and was now his, and Matteo had opinions about the doctor that he kept behind his teeth like the professional he was. But he did not say this is madness out loud. And Julian was grateful for it because it was madness. In 10 days, he would formalize a marriage that would end a war. And instead of sleeping, he was sitting outside the home of a woman he had no right to love, watching her window like a soldier watching a border. The thing he could not tell anyone, could not tell Elena, could not tell Matteo, could not tell the ghost of his mother whose name he wore on his arm, was how completely she had rearranged him. He had spent his whole life being the still point, the controlled one, the son who felt nothing on his face while men bled out in front of him because feeling was a luxury the heir could not afford. And then a woman with tired eyes and steady hands had talked to him like he was a person instead of a name. And something in him that had been holding its breath for 34 years had finally quietly exhaled. He was obsessed. Alone in the dark of the car, he could name it. He thought about her waking and sleeping, found reasons to hear her voice, had memorized the register of her laugh on the rare occasions he earned it. When Lorenzo Falcone had tucked her hair behind her ear, a violence had risen in him so cold it frightened even him, the calm certainty that he could kill a man and feel nothing so long as the man had touched her. That was the thing about the peace. Everyone thought Julian Moretti wanted peace because he was gentle. He wasn't gentle. He wanted peace because he knew exactly what he was capable of. And he had decided at 19, standing over his mother's grave, that he would not spend his life feeding the machine that had killed her by inches. The machine of blood and honor and men who solved everything with guns. He wanted peace the way a recovering addict wants sobriety, because he knew what he became without it. And Elena was the test of it. Because loving her made him want to burn the whole world down to keep her. And building the peace required him to give her up. And he had never in his life wanted 2 things this incompatible this badly. His phone buzzed. Not Elena, his consigliere, Don Rocco, an old man who had served his father and now served him with the same weary loyalty. Julian Rocco never used titles on the phone. The old man had earned the informality. "We have a problem. The Bonanos are moving money. Lorenzo's been buying things he shouldn't be buying. Guns mostly through a broker in Philadelphia we thought was Moretti loyal." Julian's eyes stayed on the lit window. "How much?" "Enough to be a statement. Enough that it's not defensive." A pause. And there's chatter. Nothing solid. "But my people say Lorenzo's been meeting with someone. Someone connected. They can't confirm who." "Rossi. Maybe." "That's the part one don't like. 10 days before you marry into that family and the youngest Falcone is buying guns and meeting people in the dark." Rocco exhaled. "It could be nothing. Lorenzo's always been a hothead, always buying toys, but it could be the sound of somebody getting ready. And if the Bonanos break the truce 10 days before your wedding, then the wedding won't matter," Julian finished. "Because there'll be a war whether the Rossi and Moretti are joined or not." "Yes." Julian was quiet for a long moment, watching the window and the two problems in his life, the private catastrophe of loving the doctor and the public catastrophe of a piece coming apart, braided together into a single cold dread he couldn't yet name. "Watch, Lorenzo," he said finally. "Watch the money." And Rocco put a man on Dr. Vance discreet. "She's not to know. If the truce is fraying, she's the first person every family in this thing is going to think about because she's the one who knows where all the bodies are. I want her safe." A pause on the line. "Julian." Rocco's voice was careful and old and had known him since he was a boy. "The doctor. Is there something I should understand?" "No," Julian said. "There's nothing to understand. She's an asset. Assets get protected. Watch Lorenzo." He hung up before the old man could ask again, and he sat in the dark and looked at the window until eventually the light went out. Then he told Matteo to drive, and he went home to a mansion full of dead men's portraits, and he did not sleep either, though he did not know that the woman across the river was not sleeping for a reason that would in 10 days end the world he was trying so carefully to save. The next morning, everything was still holding. The peace stood. The wedding was scheduled. The families circled each other in the weary equilibrium they'd maintained for a decade. It was the last morning any of that would be true, because in a nightclub in Newark, Lorenzo Falcone was receiving a phone call from a woman whose voice he loved and whose face he could never be seen with. And the woman was telling him that the neutral doctor had confirmed what they needed to know, that the doctor and the Moretti heir were exactly what they'd suspected, and that the time to move was now, before the wedding, not after. Because a wedding that produced peace was the one thing that would trap them both forever. "Are you sure?" Lorenzo said. "Once we start this, there's no I'm sure," said Francesca Rossi in a voice soft with love and hard with purpose. "Do it. Break it. Break all of it. And when the smoke clears, no one will be looking at us because everyone will be looking at the war. That's how we get free, Lorenzo. We don't run from their world. We burn it down and walk out through the ashes together." And Lorenzo Falcone, who loved her more than he loved his own life, said yes. The truce broke on a Thursday at 9:14 in the evening in 3 places at once. Later, when Elena tried to reconstruct the night, she would remember it the way patients remembered accidents, not as a sequence, but as a set of stills, disconnected, lit too bright. The pager buzzing its long, low summons, then buzzing again before she could answer the first, then a third time from a number she didn't recognize, and a fourth. All 3 families were calling her at once. That had never happened. That was, she understood, with a cold, plummeting certainty, impossible under the rules, because the rules existed precisely to make sure the 3 families never needed her at the same moment. And the only thing that could make them all need her at the same moment was all of them bleeding at the same moment. The peace was over. The war had started, and every wounded man in northern New Jersey was reaching for the one doctor they could all use. Her phone rang. Julian. She answered it with a hand that shook. Elena. His voice was hard and fast, and underneath it she could hear the thing she'd never heard in him. Fear. Real fear. Not for himself. Listen to me. Don't answer any of the pages. Don't go anywhere. The truce is broken. The Falcons hit us and the Lucys at the same time. Coordinated. They've been planning this for weeks. There are men down everywhere. And every one of them is going to want you, and you cannot go. Do you understand me? You cannot leave your apartment. Julian, people are hurt. That's my people are always hurt. That's the whole point of these people, Elena. They hurt each other. That's what they are. And if you walk out that door tonight to sew one of them up, the others will grab you the second you're in the open. Because right now you are the single most valuable object in this entire war. His voice cracked. You know everything. You know who's sick, who's weak, who's got a bastard child, who's dying. Every secret that could win this thing is inside your head. And every family knows it. And the second the shooting started, you became a target for all three sides at once. Do you understand? Neutral doesn't exist anymore. There's no neutral in a war. There's only which side gets to you first. She sat down hard on her kitchen floor, her back against the cabinets, the city burning red and gold across the river, and she understood that everything Don Salvatore had told her in his silk bed had just come true. You are worth more than any of us, and you are worth nothing at all. Where are you? She whispered. Doesn't matter. Where are you, Julian? A pause. The estate we're holding. My uncle's hit. The one you stitched. It's bad. But I can't bring you here. It's the first place they'd expect. A sound in the background. Shouting something that might have been glass. I'm sending Matteo. He's 10 minutes out. He's going to move you somewhere safe, a place nobody knows, not even Rocco. You go with him, and you don't argue, and you don't stop to help anyone. Promise me, Julian. Promise me. And then lower breaking. I can't fight this war and worry about you at the same time. I'll lose one of them. Please, please, just let me keep you safe. It's the only thing I've ever asked you for. There was so much she needed to tell him. The secret was right there screaming, there are two of us now. There are two of us. You're trying to keep safe, and she couldn't say it over a phone in the middle of a war. Couldn't hand him that while men bled around him. Okay, she said instead. Okay, I'll go with Matteo. Julian, don't die tonight. Whatever else happens, don't you dare die tonight. I don't intend to, he said. I have too much to live for now. The line went dead. Elena moved on autopilot the way she moved in a trauma bay. The fear pushed down beneath the doing. She packed the leather bag, not because she planned to use it, but because a doctor felt naked without it, and she put on her coat, and she stood by the door, and she waited for Matteo. And the pages kept coming, buzz after buzz, the wounded of three families crying out for the one healer they shared. And she made herself not answer, and it was the hardest thing she'd ever done. 10 minutes, she counted them. Across the river, the city burned on, indifferent. At the 11-minute mark, someone knocked. 2 knocks, then 1. The pattern Julian had given her over the phone, and relief flooded through her so hard her knees nearly gave, and she opened the door. It was not Matteo. There were 3 of them in dark clothes, and the one in front had a face she almost recognized from the Falcone Club, and he smiled at her the way Lorenzo Falcone had smiled. Like a man opening a safe, he decided he had the right to open. Disa, he said, we've been looking forward to a conversation. She tried to slam the door. She was fast. Years of trauma medicine had given her good reflexes, but they were faster, and there were 3 of them. And a hand caught the door, and a shoulder drove it back. And then they were inside her home, inside the last neutral ground she had, and a cloth came over her face that smelled of chemicals she could identify by name, even as they took her under. Her last thought before the dark was not fear for herself. It was I never told him. He's going to fight this whole war not knowing there were 2 of us. I never told him. Then there was nothing, and the pages buzzed on in an empty apartment, and across the river the towers burned, And somewhere Matteo arrived 1 minute too late to a door standing open on a home with no one in it. She woke to concrete and cold, and the taste of chemicals at the back of her throat. Training took over before fear could. She catalogued herself the way she'd catalog a patient. No acute pain, extremities intact, hands zip-tied in front rather than behind. Sloppy or deliberate, she couldn't tell yet. A basement, industrial, the hum of a ventilation system, a bare bulb, a metal chair beneath her, and a metal table in front of her. No windows. She had no idea how long she'd been out. The chemicals suggested hours, not minutes. The door opened and Lorenzo Falcone walked in. There she is. He sat across the table. Easy, a man in command of his own basement. The famous neutral doctor. Half my guys wanted to just take what's in your head and be done with it. I said, no, she's a professional. Professionals understand incentives. People are dying, Elena said, steadier than she felt. Right now, while you sit here, some of them from wounds I could treat. You broke a 10-year peace and kidnapped the one person who could keep your own soldiers alive. That's not strategy, Lorenzo. That's stupidity in a nice suit. Something flickered across his face, irritation, and under it briefly something that looked almost like doubt. The peace was a cage. Everybody pretending, everybody scared. You break the cage, you find out who you are. Who told you that? It was instinct. The same instinct that had read Francesca across a diner booth. Those are your words. Somebody put them in your mouth. The doubt again quickly hidden. He leaned forward. Here's how this goes. You're going to tell me everything you know about the Moretti. Weaknesses, the old man's health, who's sick, who's compromised, where the money's soft, everything you've got locked up in that head. You do that, you walk out of here alive, and you go back to being nobody. You don't. He shrugged. Then you're just a liability, and I clean up liabilities. You won't touch me, Elena said, and she believed it, and the believing surprised her. You need me alive more than you need what's in my head. You've got wounded men, Lorenzo, your own. This war you started is going to fill this basement with your soldiers. And I'm the only doctor in the state who'll treat a banano without calling the FBI. Kill me and you win the war and lose every man you need to hold what you took. She held his gaze. I'm worth more breathing. You know it. That's why my hands are tied in front instead of behind, so I can work. Lorenzo stared at her for a long moment, and then he laughed. A real laugh, surprised out of him. They said you were smart, he said. They didn't say how smart. Who's they, Lorenzo? And that was when she pushed too far and learned too much because his laugh died and his face closed and he stood up too fast. And a man who wasn't lying didn't close up like that. And Elena, who had spent 2 years learning to read what powerful people hid, saw the whole thing in the shape of his silence. You didn't plan this, she said slowly. You don't even fully understand it. Someone told you to break the peace before the wedding, not after. Someone told you the doctor and the Genovese heir were compromised. Someone's been feeding you words that aren't yours and reasons that don't add up. Lorenzo, who are you doing this for? Shut up. Because it's not the Falcone family. Your father's a ghost. You're the youngest son. You didn't have the reach to buy guns through a Genovese broker and coordinate 3 attacks in one night. Someone with better information helped you. Someone on the inside of the other families. Her mind was racing now. The pieces assembling with sickening speed. The diner, the confession. I'm in love with someone on the wrong side of everything. Someone my family would kill him for. The car waiting in the dark with a man at the wheel. She couldn't make out. Oh my God, she breathed. Francesca. The name landed like a slap. Lorenzo's whole body went rigid, and in his face Elena saw confirmation more total than any words. The flinch of a man whose lover's name had just been spoken by the last person on earth. He wanted saying it. You don't say her name, he said very quietly. And now the danger in the room was real. A different danger than the interrogation. The danger of a man protecting the one thing he loved. You don't ever say her name. She's the wrong side of everything to a Rossi daughter, Elena said, the truth pouring out of her now. Unstoppable. A banano yo. She's been in love with you since she was 19. And she's supposed to marry Julian Moretti in 9 days to seal a peace she never wanted to a man she doesn't love and spend the rest of her life watching you across ballrooms. The horror of it, the elegant, awful logic of it unfolded in her mind. So she found a way out. She couldn't refuse the marriage. That would start a war and expose her. But if the war started on its own from the outside, if the bananos broke the truce before the wedding, then there'd be no wedding to refuse, no peace to seal, just chaos. And in the chaos, no one would be watching a Lucy daughter and a banano son. She used you, Lorenzo. She used your family. She's burning down 3 families worth of men, so she doesn't have to get married. And she told you it was love. And you believed her. And you started a war on her word. She loves me, Lorenzo said, but his voice had gone thin. I'm sure she does. Elena's own voice softened because she understood suddenly that Lorenzo Bernano was as trapped as she was. A man who'd done a monstrous thing for the oldest reason in the world. I'm sure she loves you. That doesn't mean she didn't use you. People do both. She made you the engine of her escape, and she made sure the war would point everyone at the bananos and never at her. When the smoke clears, Lorenzo, who's holding the blame? Who broke the peace? You are. Not her. You. The silence in the basement was total. The ventilation hummed. Lorenzo Falcone stood over her, and she watched a decade of certainty come apart behind his eyes, watched him arrive terribly at the arithmetic he'd never let himself do. Get out, he said to the men at the door without turning around. Everybody out now. They went. The door closed and Lorenzo Falcone sat back down across the metal table from the neutral doctor, and for a long moment, neither of them said anything. 2 people who had just discovered they were both pieces in a game neither of them had been allowed to see. If you're lying to me, he said finally, and his voice shook. I'll kill you myself. I'm a doctor, Lorenzo. I don't lie about what I see. It's the only thing I've got. She leaned toward him as far as the ties would let her. You want to know what I know? Here's what I know for free. You've been set up to take the fall for a war you started for love. And the only 2 people who can prove otherwise are sitting at this table. So untie my hands and let's both stay alive long enough to figure out what we're going to do about it. Julian Moretti had not slept in 31 hours, and he was learning what kind of man he became when the peace was gone and Elena was missing. It was not the kind of man he'd wanted to be. It was the kind of man his father had been. He learned she was taken at 9:26 when Matteo called from her open door, and something in Julian had gone very cold and very clear, the way a blade goes clear when you strip everything else away. He'd stopped feeling afraid at that moment. Fear was a luxury. What replaced it was worse and more useful. A total patient murderous focus. Everyone we have, he told Rocco in the war room that had been his father's study. The dead men in their oil frames watching. Every soldier, every marker, every favor anyone's ever owed this family. I want to know where she is by morning. Julian. Rocco was pale. The old man had buried a lot of people in his life, and Julian could see him doing math he didn't like. The uncle's dead, bled out an hour ago. We couldn't move him, and we had no doctor. A pause. We have 3 men down. We might still save if we had. We don't have her because they took her, Julian said, and his voice was so flat it frightened the old man more than shouting would have. So, we get her back, and then she saves the men. That's the order of operations. Her first. The men are dying now. She's a Rocco stopped himself, but not fast enough. Say it. Julian turned to him. She's an asset. That's what you were going to say. Finish it. The old consigliere held his gaze for a long moment, and then gently, with the sorrow of a man who'd watched this exact thing destroy Julian's father, he said, She's not an asset to you. Is she, Julian? She's the reason. The reason you couldn't find a version of the piece that worked. It was her all along. Julian did not answer. The answer was on his face, and both of them knew it. You understand what this means, Rocco said quietly. The wedding is in 9 days. If it comes out that the Mafia Heir is in love with the neutral doctor, that he'd tear the family apart to save her, the Rossi will take it as the marriage being a lie. The peace was never going to hold on a marriage where the groom loves someone else. And now there's a war. And the one thing that could have stopped a war was that marriage. And you can't even pretend anymore because you're about to burn every resource we have to find one woman. The old man spread his hands. I'm not judging you, son. God knows your mother would understand. I'm telling you the price. So, you go in with your eyes open, the way she'd have wanted. Julian looked at the portrait of his grandfather, a killer, and his great-grandfather, a killer, and he thought about the world he'd wanted to build, where children didn't grow up counting bodies. And he understood that he was about to trade that world for one woman, and that he would do it, and that this made him exactly what he'd sworn at 19, never to become. I know the price, he said. Pay it, find her. They found her at 4:00 a.m. through a Banano soldier with a gambling debt and a loose mouth. A warehouse in the industrial flats off the books, a place old Don Falcone had used for storage in the days when the family still moved product with its own hands. Lorenzo's private ground. It's a trap or it's real, Rocco said, studying the map. Either way, if you go in there with soldiers, they'll kill her the second they hear us coming. She's their only leverage. The instant she stops being leverage, she stops being useful. Then I don't go in with soldiers. Julian was already checking the weapon he hadn't carried in 3 years. The weight of it familiar and terrible in his hand. I go in alone. I go in to talk. Lorenzo wants what she knows. I've got something he wants more. What could you possibly the truth about who broke the peace? Julian holstered the weapon because it wasn't Lorenzo. Lorenzo doesn't have the reach. Someone fed him the plan, and someone gave him the intelligence, and someone made sure the whole thing would land on the Banano name. And I think I finally understand who, and I think Lorenzo doesn't. And that's the wedge I'm going to drive right through the middle of this war. Rocco stared at him. You know who broke the peace? Julian thought about the engagement party, about a bride who danced with him like a merger and looked at him like a stranger. About Elena's voice on the phone. I don't think she wants this marriage. I think she's performing harder than anyone in this room. About a woman who made things happen so she could control how they fell apart. I think the woman I'm supposed to marry started this war, he said, so she wouldn't have to marry me. And I think she used the bananas to do it. And I think Lorenzo Falcone is the only person in this whole thing who's been lied to worse than I have. He walked out into the pre-dawn dark toward a warehouse where the woman he loved was held by a man who didn't know he'd been played, carrying the one piece of truth that could either save every life left in this war or end his own in the next hour. And behind him, the dead men in their frames watched the last Mafia Heir go do the most dangerous thing any of them had ever done. He was not going to war for territory or honor or the family name. He was going to war for her. And somewhere under the murderous focus in the 2 feet of air that was still the only country he was a citizen of, he was praying to a god he didn't believe in, that he wasn't already too late. The door of the basement opened at 5 a.m. and Elena, her hands now free and a plan half formed between herself and a heartbroken Lorenzo Falcone, looked up, expecting more Falcone soldiers. It was Julian. He came down the concrete stairs alone, unhurried, his hands visible and empty, and the moment his eyes found her alive, unharmed, sitting at the metal table, something moved through his whole body, a shudder of relief, so total it was almost violence, quickly mastered. Then his gaze went to Lorenzo, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. You have something of mine, Julian said. Lorenzo was on his feet, a gun in his hand, 3 of his own men flooding down the stairs behind Julian with weapons raised. You came alone? Lorenzo sounded almost impressed. The Mafia Heir walked into a Bonanno warehouse alone 9 days before his wedding for a doctor. You want to tell me that's about her medical opinions? I want to tell you who started this war, Julian said. And he did not look at the guns. He looked only at Lorenzo. Because it wasn't you. You don't have the reach to buy through my broker or the intelligence to hit 3 targets in one night. Somebody handed you this whole thing gift-wrapped. Somebody who wanted a war so badly they were willing to burn every family in the state to get it. And I think you know who, Lorenzo. I think you've known the whole time and you've been calling it love. Don't, Lorenzo said, and the gun trembled. She's supposed to marry me in 9 days, Julian said, stepping into the guns, his voice never rising. Francesca, you're Francesca, and she'd rather set the world on fire than stand beside me in that cathedral. So, she found a man who loved her enough to light the match. That's you, Lorenzo. And when the counting's done, it's the Bananos who broke the peace, the Bananos who take the blame. And a Rossi daughter and whoever she really loves walk out of the ashes free, because nobody will ever think to look at the grieving bride. The silence in the warehouse was absolute. She told me you'd say something like this, Lorenzo said, but his voice had no floor under it. She told me the Genovese would try to turn me, divide, and did she? Elena spoke from the table, quiet, steady. The doctor's voice she used to deliver diagnosis no one wanted. Lorenzo, did she tell you exactly what he'd say before he said it? Because that's not love warning you. That's a person who planned every move on this board, including this one, making sure that when the truth came for you, you'd already been trained not to hear it. Lorenzo Bernano stood in the center of his father's warehouse with a gun in his hand and 2 people telling him the same unbearable thing. And Elena watched the exact moment the certainty finally broke. Watched a young man realize that the great love of his life had made him the instrument of her freedom and the scapegoat of a war. And that he'd killed men on her word, and that he would go down in the history of these families as the fool who shattered the peace while she wept prettily at his funeral. Get out, Lorenzo said to his men for the 2nd time that night, and his voice was wrecked. Get out. They hesitated. Julian didn't move, and then slowly they went because there was something in the room bigger than orders, and even soldiers could feel it. When they were gone, Lorenzo lowered the gun and sat down heavily on the concrete stairs and put his face in his hands. And for a moment, he was not a mafia son or a warlord or a killer. He was just a boy who'd been used by the person he loved most. If it's true, he said, muffled into his hands. If she used me. He looked up and his eyes were terrible. Then I started a war for nothing. Men are dead for nothing. And the only way to stop it is to give up the one thing I have left, which is her. Or Julian said, and now he crossed the room to Elena, and his hands went to the ties around her wrists that Lorenzo had already loosened, and his fingers on her skin were not steady at all. We all stopped pretending, all 3 families. We put the truth on the table. Who really broke the peace and why? And we let the honor of it fall where it falls. It costs Francesca everything. It costs your name. It costs me. He looked at Elena and something passed between them enormous and unspoken. It costs me the marriage that was supposed to end the war. But it stops the war. That's the trade. Truth for blood. They'll never believe it. Lorenzo said, it's my word and yours against a Lucasi daughter. Francesca's untouchable. Old Salvatore is dying. Everyone knows it. And Francesca's the future of that family. You accuse her without proof. You just start a second war on top of the first. And that was when Elena understood what her own body had made her. What the secret under her heart had been building toward this entire terrible night, and she understood it with a clarity that took her breath away. You'll have proof, she heard herself say. Both men looked at her. You'll have a reason so absolute that no one can pretend it away. A reason that proves past any argument that this marriage was never going to hold, that it was a lie from the start on both sides, hers and his. Elena stood up, rubbing her freed wrists, and she looked at Julian, at the man she loved, at the father of the child no one else in the world knew about. And she made the choice she'd been circling for 11 days. The choice between the peace and the man, and discovered that the only way out was straight through the middle of both. Julian, she said, there's something I have to tell you, and after I tell you, nothing is ever going to be neutral again. She told him in the warehouse with Lorenzo Falcone sitting broken on the stairs, because there was no clean place left in the world to tell him, and there never would be. "I'm pregnant," she said. "It's yours. 6 weeks since the night you came to my apartment. I've known for 11 days, and I didn't tell you because I couldn't figure out how to hand you a thing that would burn down everything you built." She held his gaze, and her own voice shook now, finally, the doctor's steadiness deserting her when she needed it least. "That's the reason, Julian. That's the proof. A Geneva heir who fathered a child with a neutral doctor 2 weeks before his wedding. There's no version of that marriage that was ever going to hold. Not for you, not for me, not for the peace." For a long moment, Julian Moretti did not move at all. He stood in the gray warehouse light, and he looked at her, and Elena watched 100 things cross his face, too fast to name. Shock and grief and fear, and under all of it rising like a sun, something so fierce and unguarded that she almost couldn't bear to look at it. Then he crossed the space between them and took her face in both hands. And he was not cold now, not controlled, not the air or the peace or the name. He was just a man who had been handed the one thing he'd never let himself hope for. "You've been carrying this alone," he said very low, "for 11 days in the middle of a war and still trying to protect me." His thumbs moved against her cheekbones. "You should have let me carry it with you. You had a piece to build. The piece was never worth more than you." He pressed his forehead to hers. "And now there's 2 of you. 2 of you I'd burn the world for. There's no choice here. There was never a choice." Behind them, Lorenzo let out a sound. Half laugh, half sob. "Well, there it is. There's your proof." He scrumped his face. The Rossi daughter didn't want the marriage. The Moretti heir didn't want the marriage. And the whole piece everyone's been bleeding for was 2 people faking it. Something shifted in him. If Francesca had just come to me, if we'd run, nobody would have died. But nobody in these families can imagine walking away. So she tried to win the game instead and lit a war to do it. He stood. "I'm done being her match. If we're putting the truth on the table, we put all of it. Mine too. You understand what that costs you?" Julian said, stepping back from Elena, but keeping one hand at the small of her back, the possessive protective weight of it grounding her. "You confess you broke the peace on a woman's word. A Luss's woman. You're admitting to a war. Your own family might not survive the shame of it. The other capos will want your head. Better my head than my soul," Lorenzo said. Besides, a bitter smile. "You think I've got a future either way. The war's lost the second you 2 walk out of here alive. My family broke the peace. There's no coming back from that. The only question left is whether I go down as a fool who did it for nothing or a man who told the truth and stopped the bleeding." He looked at Elena. "You did this, daughter-sa. You walked into my basement as a hostage and you turned me in an hour. Julian, this one's more dangerous than all 3 families put together. You should marry her before she runs the whole state." Julian didn't laugh. He looked at Elena with an intensity that made her flush, and he said, "I intend to." The word hung there. "Marry." Elena opened her mouth to say something about the impossibility of it, the 8 surviving days of chaos between here and any future. And Julian pressed a finger gently to her lips. "Not now, not here in a warehouse with a war on. But I'm telling you where I stand. When this is over, there's no going back to Tuesdays and 2 feet of air. You're mine. You've been mine since you told me my pulse was 92. His hand slid to her jaw. "So, we survived this, all 3 of us." His eyes dropped to her stomach, and something broke open in his face again. "And then we build a life. The families can't touch. It's the only plan I've got left, and the only one I've ever wanted. They'll never let us," Elena whispered. "You know that. A neutral doctor who's not neutral anymore, carrying a Moretti child. I'm not an asset now, Julian. I'm a bomb. Every family in this thing is going to understand exactly what that child means the second it's known. Bloodline leverage. A Moretti Heir with no protection and every reason to be used. I know his jaw tightened, which is why we control how it comes out. We don't let it leak in a whisper in a way they can use in the dark." We put it on the table ourselves in the open in front of all 3 families at once, framed exactly the way we want it framed. He looked at Lorenzo. There's going to be a meeting. There has to be. The war can't sustain itself. Everyone's bleeding. Someone's going to call for a sit-down within days. When they do, we walk in with the whole truth. Who broke the peace and why? And when they move to execute the doctor for knowing too much, because they will, Elena, the second the war's over, that's the first thing they'll all agree on. I stopped them with the one fact none of them can argue with. The blood drained from Elena's face as she understood what he meant. You tell them, she breathed. About the baby, about us in front of all 3 families. It's the only thing that saves you. His voice was gentle and absolute. A doctor who knows too much, they kill. The mother of a Genovese heir carrying the bloodline of one of the 3 families. They can't touch her without touching the child. And they can't touch the child without starting a blood feud that makes this war look like a disagreement. It makes you untouchable, Elena. It's a cage, he held her eyes. But it's a cage that keeps you breathing. And I'll spend the rest of my life turning it into something better than a cage. I swear it to you. Elena stood in the warehouse between the man she loved and the man she'd unmade, carrying the child that had turned her from a keeper of secrets into the secret itself. And she understood that there was no path back to neutral, that neutral had died the night the truce broke, that she was about to become something no woman in this world had ever been. Then let's go tell 3 families the truth, she said, and see who's left standing when it's over. They did not get the meeting for 6 more days, and the 6 days were the longest of Elena's life. She spent them in a safe house Julian owned under a name that connected to nothing. A quiet stone house upstate with a lake behind it and Matteo at the door. And she was not idle because the war did not stop for her safety. Julian brought her the wounded he could move his own men, and then in an arrangement that would have been unthinkable a week earlier some of Marcos. Because Lorenzo Falcone had made a private separate peace with the Moretti heir that no one else yet knew about. A peace built on a shared enemy and a shared truth. So the neutral doctor, who was no longer neutral, treated the soldiers of a war she had helped set in motion, and she was good at it, and it kept her hands busy, while her mind ran the terrible arithmetic of the days ahead. Julian came each night exhausted, and she checked him over with clinical hands that could not quite hide how they trembled at the sight of the bruises, the graze on his ribs he hadn't mentioned, the exhaustion carving his face into something older. And each night he sat with his hand flat against her still flat stomach, saying nothing, just feeling for the future that neither of them could yet hear. And it was the most tender and the most frightened she had ever seen a person be. "Tell me about your mother," she said one night, because she wanted to know the shape of the family her child would carry. He was quiet a while. She hated it. All of it. She married my father young and in love, and by the time she understood what he was, she had a son and no way out. She used to take me to the shore, just the 2 of us, and she'd say, his voice roughened, "Julian, promise me you'll be the one who gets out. One of us has to." Then she died before I could, and I spent 15 years trying to keep a promise to a dead woman. He looked at Elena. The peace was how I was going to keep it. Get out through the front door by ending the thing instead of running from it. And now a rough laugh. Now the getting out looks like war and scandal and a child born into the middle of a family feud. Not what she meant. Not what I planned. Maybe it's better than what she meant, Elena said softly. She wanted you to get out so you wouldn't become your father. You didn't. You walked into a Banano warehouse alone to save a woman and told the truth to a man who could have killed you. That's not your father, Julian. Your father would have sent soldiers and burned the warehouse down. He looked at her for a long moment. You really believe that? I've stitched your father's world back together for 2 years, she said. I know exactly what it does to men, and I know what it hasn't done to you. That's the whole reason I let you sit on my exam table. He kissed her, then slow and deep and desperate. A man kissing the future in the middle of a war. And afterward they lay in the dark of the safe house with the lake making its small sounds outside, and for a few hours the world could not reach them. But the world was reaching for everyone else. The reports painted a war eating itself. The Banano attack had been devastating but not decisive. All three families were bleeding into a stalemate that served no one. Soldiers were dying in towns that had known 10 years of quiet. And the police, bought or blind for a decade, were beginning to notice, which meant federal attention, the one thing all three families feared more than each other. And through it all, Francesca Rossi played the grieving bride. That was the part that turned Elena's stomach. Lorenzo's back channel reported it in a flat, wounded voice. Francesca publicly devastated that the war had shattered her wedding, her peace, her father's dying dream. Francesca comforting the Rossi soldiers' widows. Francesca quietly consolidating her position as the future of a family whose dawn was days from death. Positioning herself as the only one who could hold the Rossi together through the crisis she had personally engineered. She had not put a foot wrong. She had turned the war into her own coronation, and no one but the 4 people who knew the truth suspected a thing. "She's brilliant," Elena said, reading the report by lamplight. "It's monstrous, but it's brilliant. She burned everything down and made herself the hero of the fire." "She made one mistake," Julian said. "What?" "She assumed the doctor would break." He took the report from Elena's hands. "She had you kidnapped to be interrogated because she assumed you'd give up the Moretti secrets and confirm the story she needed, that we were compromised, that the war was justified. She never imagined you'd turn Lorenzo instead. She built her whole plan on you being a vault to be cracked. She never once considered you might be a person who could see the whole board." He looked at her with something like awe. "She underestimated you, Elena. Everyone in this world underestimated you. They all thought you were a thing that kept secrets. None of them noticed you were smart enough to understand them." The sit-down came on the 6th day. It came the way these things came. A message through intermediaries, a neutral location agreed upon, old protocols dusted off, because even a war this bad had rules for how it might end. All three families, all principles, a meeting under the ancient guarantee of parley, to see whether the bleeding could be stopped before the Federals or the collapse did it for them. Rocco brought the message to the safe house himself, and he was gray with dread. "They've called the sit-down," he said. "Tomorrow night. The old hall in the Ironbound, the one all three families used to use before the peace. Everyone comes, everyone's disarmed, everyone talks." He looked at Julian, then at Elena, and his old eyes filled with something close to grief. "And Julian, the first item on the table before anyone talks peace is the doctor. All three families agree on exactly one thing right now. The neutral doctor knows too much. She's been in Falcone hands. No one can trust what she's given up. And the war made her a loose end that has to be tied off." He swallowed. "They've already decided. Before any peace talk begins, the doctor is to be brought forward and executed as a gesture of good faith to prove that no one holds an advantage in secrets going forward. It's the one thing they all agree on." The lamplight flickered outside. The lake made its small sounds, and Elena Vance put her hand over the child no one but 3 people knew about, and understood that tomorrow night she would walk into a hall full of the most dangerous men in the state, and that they had already sentenced her to death, and that the only thing standing between her and that sentence was a truth so explosive it would either save her or start the war all over again. "Then tomorrow," she said, and her voice did not shake because she was a doctor and she had faced death across a table before. "We tell them everything." The hall smelled of old smoke and older money. It had been a social club once, in the days when the 3 families still pretended to be social clubs. A long, low room with a stamped tin ceiling and a bar no one had polished in years, and a single long table down the center where, for the first time in a decade, all 3 families sat down together in the same room to decide whether they would go on killing each other. Elena walked in between Julian and Matteo, and the room went silent. She counted the players the way she counted vitals. At the head of the table in a wheelchair, old Don Carmine Lucy's, wheeled in to preside over a piece his feeling heart would not live to see. Beside him in black, composed and devastating, Francesca, the Moretti contingent, Rocco, gray and watchful, and the Falcones, old Don Falcone, a stroke silence ghost, and Lorenzo, eyes down, playing the part they'd agreed until the moment came. And around the walls, disarmed but present, the soldiers. 50 men who had spent 6 days killing each other, gathered under parley in a room where any spark could restart the fire. So it was a Lucasy underboss who spoke, a heavy man named Falcone, who had taken up the family's voice while the Don failed. The Genovese bring the doctor. Good. That saves us the trouble of finding her. He looked at Elena with the flat assessment of a man pricing meat. Let's do the necessary thing first, and then talk like men. The doctor's been in Banano hands. She knows everything about everyone, and now God knows what she's told them. She's a loose end. We tie it off. We all start even. We talk peace with clean books. He nodded to a soldier by the wall. Bring her forward. No, Julian said. The single word dropped into the room like a stone into a well. 50 men turned to look at the Moretti heir, and Elena felt Julian's hand close around hers in full view of every family in the state, an act that told them more than any speech could. The doctor is under Moretti protection. Julian said she is not to be touched. The doctor is neutral. Falcone sat an edge coming into his voice. She belongs to no one. That was the whole she's not neutral anymore, Julian said, and his voice carried down the long table, flat and clear and absolute. She hasn't been neutral for weeks. And before this room decides to execute her, this room is going to hear the truth about how this war started and who started it and why. Because you've all been lied to. Every one of you. And the woman you're about to kill is the only reason the truth is going to come out at all. The room erupted, voices, chairs scraping, Falcone half rising, the soldiers along the wall shifting, and through it all Elena watched Francesca Rossi, watched her go very still, watched the calculation flicker behind her beautiful eyes as she understood that something had gone wrong, that a piece she thought she'd removed from the board was still in play. Julian raised a hand, and the Moretti name still carried enough weight to buy silence. The Falcones broke the peace, he said. That's true. Everyone knows it. But the Falcones didn't plan it. Lorenzo Falcone didn't have the reach to buy through my broker, or the intelligence to hit 3 targets in one night, or the reason to want a war 8 days before a wedding that would have made him nothing and made the Genovesian Rossi everything. Julian's eyes moved down the table, slow, deliberate, until they came to rest on the woman in black beside the dying Don. He had a partner, someone on the inside, someone who gave him the intelligence and the reason and the plan, someone who wanted this war so badly they were willing to burn every family in this room to get it, because a war was the only thing that could stop a wedding they couldn't refuse. This is madness. Falcone said the Genovese heir is protecting his with fairy tales. Julian moved so fast that even Elena didn't see it. And then Falcone was silent because Julian Moretti was looking at him with the flat, clear, murderous focus that Elena had glimpsed only twice, and every man in the room recognized it as the thing that lived under the piece, the thing Julian had spent his life keeping caged. You'll want to be careful, Julian said quietly, about the next word you use for the mother of my child. The silence that followed was the deepest Elena had ever heard. It spread through the hall like cold water. 50 men, 3 families, a dying Don, and a woman in black. All of them frozen. All of them recalculating everything as the Moretti heir stood in the middle of a war he was supposed to end by marriage and announced in front of every power in the state that he had fathered a child with the neutral doctor. Francesca Lutch stood up. That's a lie, she said. But her voice had a hairline crack in it now because she understood better than anyone in the room exactly what Julian had just done. He hadn't just protected Elena. He'd proven that the marriage, her marriage, the foundation of the peace, had been a lie on the groom's side from the start, which meant the question of why it had also been a lie on the bride's side was now the only question in the room. "It's not a lie," Elena said, and she stepped forward out of Julian's shadow, into the center of the hall, into the full attention of the most dangerous men in the state. And she was terrified, and she did not let it show, because she had faced death across a table before, and she would face it standing up. "I'm a doctor. I don't lie about what's true in a body. I'm pregnant. It's Julian's and I've known for 17 days. Which means the marriage that was supposed to seal your peace was never going to hold. Not because of the war, but because the groom loved someone else before a single shot was fired." She let that land. Then she turned slowly to Francesca. The only thing left to explain is why the bride was so eager to burn it all down too. Isn't it, Francesca? Francesca Lucchese was the best liar in a room full of professional liars. And for a moment Elena thought she might survive on that alone. "I don't know what the doctor thinks she's accusing me of," Francesca said, and her voice had steadied, and she turned to the room with the wounded dignity of a betrayed bride. "I lost my wedding to this war. I lost my father's dream of peace. And now the man who was supposed to marry me stands here with his mistress and his bastard and tries to make me the villain of his own betrayal. This is a Genevieve play. They want to shift the blame for the doctor onto a Lucy so they can protect the woman who's carrying their heir. It's obvious. It's beneath us to even then explain the diner," Elena said. Francesca stopped. 11 days ago, you called me yourself, not through a driver yourself. You asked to meet somewhere no one knew off Route 17, and you came alone, which a Lucchese daughter never does. And you told me you were in love with someone your family would kill him for. Someone on the wrong side of everything. Elena kept her voice level, clinical, the voice she used to deliver a terminal diagnosis. And then you asked me one question over and over in 3 different ways. You asked whether I was really neutral, whether the neutral doctor had chosen a side. You needed to know if Julian and I were what you suspected, because if we were, then the marriage was already a lie, and you could set your plan in motion, knowing the wedding would never have held anyway. She turned to the room. She wasn't confessing to me. She was gathering intelligence. She needed to confirm that the groom was compromised before she pulled the trigger on a war. And I gave it to her without knowing what I'd given. That's the only mistake I've made in 2 years of neutrality. I underestimated her, the same way she underestimated me. The room was dead silent. Every eye moved from Elena to Francesca and back. "Ask her who she loves," Lorenzo Falcone said. He'd been silent the whole meeting, eyes down, playing his part. Now he stood and he raised his head, and he looked at Francesca across the long table with an expression that broke Elena's heart, even knowing what he was. A man giving up the only thing he'd ever wanted on purpose in public to stop a war. "Ask her," Lorenzo said again. "Ask the grieving bride who she's really in love with. The person her family would kill." His voice cracked. "It's me since she was 19. She's a Louise. I'm a Falcone. And we've spent 7 years loving each other in the dark." He laughed, wrecked. 2 weeks before the wedding, she came to me and said, "I can't spend my life next to a stranger while you watch from across the room. Break the peace before the wedding, and in the chaos, no one will ever look at us," and I loved her enough to do it. I bought the guns. I coordinated the attacks. I broke the peace on the word of the woman I love. He looked at the room full of men whose brothers he'd killed. "So if you want someone to execute tonight for breaking the truce, it's me. I did it. But I didn't do it for the Bonanno name or territory or power. I did it because a Rossi daughter looked at me and asked me to burn down the world so she wouldn't have to get married." His eyes went back to Francesca and they were wet. "And she never once meant to walk out of the ashes with me, did she? That was a lie too. I was just the match." The hall detonated, not with violence. The parley held barely, but with sound, 50 men roaring at once, the Lucchese soldiers surging up in defense of their princess, the Falcones frozen in horror at their own heir's confession, the Moretti closing ranks around Julian and Elena. And through all of it, Elena watched Francesca Lucy's face, and she watched the mask finally completely fail. Because Francesca looked at Lorenzo, at the man who had just confessed to loving her, who had just thrown away his life and his name to tell the truth she'd built her whole plan on him never telling. And for one unguarded second, in front of every power in the state, her composure shattered, and something raw and real and devastated broke across her beautiful face. She did love him. That was the thing. She'd used him, and she loved him. And watching him destroy himself for the truth had cracked her open. And the crack was visible to every man in the room. And it was the only confession that mattered, because you could argue with words, but you could not argue with a woman's face coming apart at the sight of her lover's ruin. "Lorenzo," she said, and it came out broken, and it was the first true thing she'd said in the entire meeting, and it damned her completely. "Lorenzo, why did you?" "Because I was tired of the dark," he said simply. Old Don Carmine Lucy's, silent in his wheelchair the entire time, his dying heart, the reason Elena knew things she should not know, raised one trembling hand. The room fell silent for the dying Don. "My daughter," he said, and his voice was a ruin, a whisper the whole hall strained to hear. "My daughter started a war." He looked at Francesca, and there was no anger in his ravaged face, only an old man's terrible grief. "You started a war, Francesca. Men are dead. The peace I spent my life building. The peace I was going to die believing in. You burned it for a Bonanno boy. And you let this room believe it was him alone." A long, rattling breath. "I am dying. Everyone here knows it because that woman," a nod at Elena, "is too honest to have hidden it, and I made her carry it, and that was cruel of me. I am dying, and I will not spend my last strength defending a lie. Even my daughters, especially my daughters." He turned his ruined face to the room, to the three families, to the war he was too weak to stop with anything but the truth. "The Bonannos broke the peace," Don Carmine said, "but my daughter lit the match. Both families carry this, both. And any man in this room who wants to make it right with blood," the old eyes closed, "will only give my death a war to be born into. I am too old and too near the end to want that. I want peace. I have always only wanted peace." He opened his eyes and looked of all people at Elena. "And the only neutral thing left in this room, God help us all, is the doctor carrying the Moretia child. So perhaps she is the only one left who can broker it. It should have ended there. It did not, because honor is a fire that does not care what the dying want." The truth was out. Francesca's plot, Lorenzo's confession, the false foundation of the marriage, the child. And for a moment, in the ringing aftermath of Don Carmine's words, it seemed the sheer weight of it might collapse the war into an exhausted peace. But Elena had spent 2 years learning what these families were, and she understood, watching the room, that truth alone stops nothing. Truth only changes what men fight about. Falconii, the Rossi underboss, was the one who moved first. He was a man who had built his position on Francesca's rise, whose future was bound to hers. And he understood in an instant that if Francesca fell, so did he. And so he did what cornered men in that world always did. He reached for honor. "A Jane," he said, his voice rising over the den, "stands in this hall and admits he fathered a bastard on the woman who holds every family's secrets. Admits it. And you want to make him a mediator. You want to reward the man who broke faith with a Rossi daughter, humiliated her in front of 3 families, made her the villain to cover his own filth." He was playing to the room now, to the Rossi soldiers, to the old hungry logic that had run these families for a century. "My Don is dying and grief has made him soft. But I am not soft. The Groves insulted this family. That insult is answered in blood. War or no war. Peace or no peace. That's the law that came before the truce, and it's the law that'll outlive it." And Elena watched the war she'd thought she was ending simply change its name. No longer Bonanno against the others, but a question of honor of a Genovese heir who had shamed a Rossi daughter, and honor burned hotter than territory, because territory was arithmetic, and pride was not. Men were on their feet again. Hands that had been ordered empty were drifting toward places where weapons should have been. The parley, the ancient guarantee that held the sit-down together, was fraying in real time, and Elena understood that in about 90 seconds this hall was going to become the worst mass casualty event she had ever failed to prevent. Julian stepped forward, and his voice cut through the room like a blade. "Then answer it with me," he said to Falcone. "Not with a war, with me. You want blood for the insult? I'm the one who gave it. Not my family, not my soldiers. Me. So take it up with me. One man to one man. And leave everyone else out of it." He spread his hands. "That's the old law too, Falcone. Older than the war you want. A man answers for his own insult with his own body. So here I am. Answer it, Julian." "No," Elena started. "He's bluffing." Falcone sneered. "The Genovese heir want I'm not bluffing." Julian's voice was flat and clear and absolutely certain, and every man in the room heard it and believed it. "I fathered a child with a woman I loved 2 weeks before a wedding I never wanted to a woman who was planning to burn down the state so she wouldn't have to marry me. If that's an insult to the Lucys' honor, then I'll answer for it however the Lucys want. But I'll answer for it alone. Not one more soldier dies for my choices. Not one. The war ends here tonight. One way or another, and it ends with me." And there it was, the thing Elena had seen in him the very first night at the top of the stairs. The stillness that was not calm, but control, the banked heat under the ice. Julian Moretti had spent his whole life trying to end the cycle of blood. And now he was offering his own body to end it because he had finally found something he loved more than the promise he'd made his dead mother. And he was willing to die to protect it. It was the most terrifying, the most beautiful, the most insane thing Elena had ever seen. And she understood that if she did not do something in the next 30 seconds, she was going to watch the father of her child walk into a room full of guns and offer himself up like a lamb. So she did the only thing left. She used the one thing she had that no one else in the room had. "Stop," Elena said. And she said it in the voice she used in a trauma bay when a room full of panicking people needed one person to be calm. The voice that made surgeons and nurses and terrified families all turn and obey without knowing why. "Everyone stop, sit down, all of you, because I am the only person in this room who can hurt every single one of you. And it's time you remembered that." The room turned to her, even Falcone. "You want to talk about what I know?" Elena walked to the head of the table, past the dying Dawn, past Francesca. Her fear burned away into something cold and absolute. "I know which of you is dying and hasn't told his family. Which of you has a disease he's hiding from his wife? Which of your soldiers are informants? Because I've treated the wounds they got in places they lied about. Which children in which houses were fathered by which men in this room? I am the most dangerous woman in New Jersey, and every one of you has spent this meeting deciding whether to kill me for it." She let that land. Let them feel the weight of it. 50 men suddenly aware that the woman they'd sentenced to death was holding every one of their throats in her hands. And I've never spent a single one of those secrets, not one, for 2 years. Because I understood that the second I did, I stopped being a doctor and became a weapon. So here's what's going to happen. You're not going to kill me because you can't, because I'm carrying a child that makes me untouchable, and because I know things that would end half of you, and you're not going to fight a war of honor over Julian Moretti because I won't treat a single one of your wounded if you do. The threat dropped into the room like a bomb. "You need me," Elena said into the ringing silence. "All 3 of you always have. The peace didn't hold because of a marriage. The peace held because you all needed the same doctor and none of you could afford to be the one who lost her. That's the real truce. It was never about territory or marriages. It was about the fact that you're all mortal and you all bleed, and there's exactly one person in the world all 3 of you can trust to keep you breathing." She put her hand flat on the long table. "So sit down and let's negotiate a real peace this time. Not one built on a wedding that was a lie on both sides. One built on the only thing that's actually true in this room. That every single one of you is going to need me again. And I only stay if the war stops now." Nobody moved for a long, long moment. Then slowly, Falcone sat down, and one by one, family by family, the most dangerous men in New Jersey sat down at the long table and turned to the neutral doctor, who was no longer neutral, and waited to hear what the mother of a Genevieve was going to make them agree to. Elena had never negotiated anything more consequential than a shift swap, and now 3 crime families waited for her to invent a peace. It was not so different from a trauma bay. A room full of people in crisis, each convinced their emergency was the only one and one person's job to impose an order they couldn't see. She had done it 1,000 times. She did it now. First, the shooting stops tonight. Not tomorrow. Tonight. Every soldier in this room sends the word out before we leave. Anyone who fires after midnight is disowned by his own family, and I stopped treating that family entirely. That's not negotiable. Rocco, the old Moretti conciliar, was watching her with an expression of dawning horrified respect. The men won't like being told to stand down by a woman, by a doctor. Elena didn't flinch. The men will like bleeding out in a wine cellar even less. Tell them the doctor said stop or the doctor stops. They'll understand incentives. Lorenzo told me these people always understand incentives. Lorenzo Falcone, sitting apart now, isolated by his own confession, gave a hollow laugh. She's right. They will. Second. Elena looked down the table. The question of honor. Falcone wants blood for the insult to the Lucas. I understand the logic. I don't accept it, but I understand it. So here's the trade. She had been building this in her head for 6 days in the safe house, treating wounded men and running the arithmetic. And now she laid it out like a surgical plan. The insult to the Lucys wasn't Julian's affair. The real insult to the Rossi was done by a Rossi, by Francesca, who used a Lucy's daughter's position to start a war that killed Rossi soldiers. Your family's honor wasn't wounded by the Geneva. It was wounded from the inside. And you can't answer an internal wound with an external war. That's not honor. That's just more bodies. Falcone's jaw worked. He knew she was right. He hated that she was right. Third, she turned to Francesca, who sat very still, all her masks gone now. Just a young woman who had gambled everything and lost. Francesca and Lorenzo love each other. That's the root of all of it. 7 years of loving each other in the dark because a Rossi and a Banano couldn't be seen together because your world would rather have a war than a wedding between the wrong 2 families. Elena looked around the table. You want to know how to build a peace that actually holds? Stop treating love between families as treason. Francesca didn't want to marry Julian because she was already bound to a Banano. If your world had a way for that to be anything but a death sentence, she'd never have needed to burn everything down. The war didn't happen because of a broken marriage. It happened because your world only allows one kind of marriage, the strategic kind, and punishes every other kind with death. So the real peace, the one that lasts, is the one where a Lucchese can love a Bonanno and it's a wedding, not a war. The silence this time was different. It was the silence of men hearing something true that they had never let themselves think. You're proposing, Rocco said slowly, that Francesca Rossi marry Lorenzo Falcone, the 2 people who started the war. I'm proposing the 2 families most torn apart by this war bind themselves the way the Lucys and Moretti were supposed to. Except this one isn't a lie. Francesca and Lorenzo actually love each other. Everyone saw it 10 minutes ago when his face came apart, and so did hers. You want a marriage to seal a peace? There's your marriage. And it costs them everything they'd have won. Francesca gives up her play for the Lucchese future. Lorenzo answers for the war by binding his family to the peace forever. They pay by being made responsible for what they broke. That's justice and a treaty in one stroke. Lorenzo was staring at her. Francesca was staring at her. And between them across the length of the table something passed. The 2 lovers who had burned down the world looking at a future in which they might impossibly be allowed to have each other if the price was carrying the peace they'd shattered on their own backs for the rest of their lives. And the Moretti. Falcone said Julian gets to walk away with his doctor and his bastard and no consequence. Julian gets the largest consequence of all, Elena said quietly. He gives up the marriage that would have made the Moretti first among the three families. That was the whole point of the Lucy's match. It would have made his family the senior partner in the piece. He surrenders that. The Moretti take no advantage from any of this. And the child, she put her hand on her stomach and she looked at Julian and she said the hardest thing. The child is raised outside the families. Not as an heir, not as leverage, not as the next Dawn. Julian's mother made him promise that one of them would get out. This child is how he keeps that promise. This child gets out. That's the Moretti payment. They give up their future to buy everyone's present. Julian's eyes met hers across the hall, and she saw in them everything, the grief of surrendering the peace he'd planned, the terror of the future, and under it all, blazing, the recognition that she had just found the one solution none of them could see. The solution that cost every family exactly enough to make it fair and left every family exactly enough to make it survivable. And you, Don Salvatore whispered from his wheelchair, his dying eyes fixed on Elena. What do you take, Doessa? Every piece has a price for the one who brokers it. What's yours? Elena had thought about this, too, in the long nights at the lake. I stopped being neutral, she said. I can't be anymore. I'm the mother of a Genovese child. So I become something else. Not a doctor you all use in the dark. A mediator you all answer to in the light. When there's a dispute between families, it comes to me. When someone breaks the peace, they answer to me. I hold your secrets. And now I hold your peace. And the price of my silence and my medicine and my mediation is that none of you ever picks up a gun against another family again without going through me first. She looked around the table at the most dangerous men in the state. You made me a repository of your secrets. Fine, I accept it. But I'm not a vault anymore. I'm the terms. Break the peace and I open the vault and every secret in it comes out at once and all three of you burn together. She let them feel it. That's my price. I don't want money. I don't want territory. I want the war to be over and I want it to stay over. And I've just made myself the only thing standing between all of you and mutual destruction. Welcome to the new truce. It's got my name on it now. Nobody spoke. And then old Don Carmine Rossi, dying, laughed. A thin, delighted, astonished laugh. The laugh of a man who had spent 70 years among killers and had just watched an unarmed doctor take command of all of them. I told you, he was to know into the room, to the ghosts. I told her 2 years ago, the most dangerous woman in New Jersey. He raised his trembling hand one last time. The Rossi agree. God help us. The Rossi agree. The negotiations lasted until dawn. Elena had thought the hard part was getting them to agree in principle. She learned over the next 6 hours that the hard part was everything after. Because men who had spent their whole lives measuring power in inches did not simply hand it over because a doctor gave a speech. They argued, they circled, they tested her again and again, probing for the place where she would flinch or bend or reveal that she didn't really mean it. She did not flinch. She had spent 2 years being underestimated, and it had made her patient, and patience was the one weapon none of these men had learned to counter. When a Falcone capo argued Lorenzo had to answer for the war with his life, Elena said his life answers by belonging to the peace. A dead Lorenzo is a martyr and martyrs start wars. A living Lorenzo bound to a Luss's spending his days as the guarantee the Bananos never break faith again. That punishment keeps working. Killing him is easy. Making him carry it is justice. When Falcone argued Francesca could not survive her own treason, Elena said, then you execute the future of the Rossi this same week your Dawn dies and leave that family leaderless in a peace nobody trusts yet. She survives because a leaderless family is more dangerous than a guilty one. And she spends her life proving she deserves to. When the Genovese soldiers themselves, Julian's own men, bristled at their heir surrendering the family's advantage, Elena turned to them and said, Your Don's brother died in a wine cellar 3 weeks ago because there was no doctor and a war outside the door. How many more of you want to die that way? Julian's giving up a crown none of you would live to enjoy. He's buying you old age. Take it." And through all of it, Julian watched her. He said little during the negotiation. He had learned, watching her, that his voice carried the weight of the Moretti name, and hers carried something else, something that belonged to no family, and therefore could speak to all of them. And he had the wisdom to let her wield it. But every time she made a point that landed, every time she outer-argued a man twice her age who had killed more people than she'd saved, she felt his eyes on her, and the look in them was not pride exactly. It was closer to wonder, the look of a man who had spent his life among predators and had just watched the person he loved reveal herself to be the most formidable creature in the room. Once, near dawn, during a lull, while the capos conferred in low voices, he came to stand beside her at the head of the table and spoke without looking at her, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "You know what you're becoming," he said quietly. "You understand what this makes you. You're not getting out, Elena. I wanted to get you out. I wanted to give you a life the families couldn't touch. And instead, you just walked into the center of all three of them and made yourself the thing that holds them together." A pause. "You're more inside it now than I am. More inside it than any of us. I know. You could have let me take the jewel. Falcone would have accepted it. You could be free right now and I'd be..." He stopped. "Dead," she finished. "You'd be dead, or you'd have killed a man and become the thing your mother begged you not to be. Those were the two doors you were walking toward, Julian, and I wasn't going to walk through either one." She turned to look at him then and let him see all of it. "I didn't do this to hold three families together. I don't care about their peace. I did it because it was the only version of the future with you alive in it and your hands clean. Everything else was just the math I had to do to get there." Something moved through him, powerful and unguarded, and for a moment she thought he might take her in his arms in front of the whole hall, treaty or no treaty. "When this is signed," he said, low and rough, "I'm marrying you. Not for a family, not for a peace, for me. Because the idea of a single day where you're not mine is more than I can stand. Do you understand?" "There's no signing," Elena said and almost smiled. "It's an unwritten truce. It always has been. That's the whole point. Nothing's ever on paper. It holds because everyone agrees it holds." "Then say you agree to hold," Julian said. "That's the only signature I need." She looked at him, the cold, dangerous heir, who had turned out to be the warmest thing in her life, the man who had walked alone into a warehouse for her, who had announced their child to a room full of killers to keep her alive, who was now offering her the one thing he'd sworn he could never have and give. "At the same time, I agree to hold," Elena said. And that, in the gray dawn of a hall in the Ironbound, was the truest peace treaty signed that morning. By the time the sun was fully up, it was done. The terms were set, unwritten, and binding. The Rossi would join with the Falcone through the marriage of Francesca and Lorenzo, the two who had broken the peace made responsible for keeping it. Their union, a permanent hostage exchange dressed as a love match, which it also impossibly was. The Genovese would take no advantage, surrendering the seniority the original marriage would have given them. Julian would step back from the front rank of the family's power and his child would be raised outside the life entirely. And Elena Vance, formerly the neutral doctor, would stand as mediator over all three families, keeper of their secrets, healer of their wounded, and now the living guarantee of a peace that ran through her and no one else. Old Don Salvatore did not live to see his daughter's marriage. He died 4 days later in the silk bed where he had once called Elena the most dangerous woman in New Jersey. And she was with him at the end because he asked for her and no one else, the doctor who had carried his dying heart as a secret for 2 years and never once spent it. "Did I do a terrible thing?" he whispered near the end. "Making you into this. You are a doctor. Now you're one of us. I did that. I chose you that night with the boy in the delivery van. I made you the doctor. And the doctor became the terms. His failing hand found hers. Forgiven old man. I only wanted the killing to stop. I only ever wanted the killing to stop. It stopped, Elena told him, holding the hand of a man who had ordered more deaths than she could count because she was a doctor and dying men were dying men. You lived to see it stop because of the doctor you chose. Rest now, Don Salvatore. The peace holds. I'll hold it. He died a little after midnight, and Elena signed no death certificate, and the Rossi family buried their Don and their old war in the same week. And the neutral ground she had once stood on was gone forever, replaced by something she had built with her own hands, out of secrets and courage and the fierce refusal to let the man she loved die for a world that didn't deserve him. 7 months later, in a private clinic that belonged on paper to no one, Elena Vance gave birth to a daughter. It was the strangest labor any obstetrician had ever attended, though the obstetrician, hand-picked, discreet, paid for silence, did not know the half of it. She did not know the pacing man in the hallway was the heir to a crime family who had surrendered a crown for the woman inside, or that the guards at the doors were Geneva soldiers and a third car held Banano men, or that the flowers that morning came from Francesca and Lorenzo Falcone, newly married, sending regards to the woman who had spared both their lives. She did not know the baby crying in Elena's arms was, by the terms of an unwritten treaty, one of the most significant human beings born in New Jersey that year. She only knew that the mother was a doctor, that the delivery had gone cleanly, and that the man who came into the room afterward looked at the woman and the child with an expression she had never seen on any father in 20 years of practice. Something so raw and so absolute that she made an excuse and left them alone. Julian Moretti sat on the edge of the bed and looked at his daughter, and for a long time he could not speak at all. She's so small, he finally managed. 7 1-ounce. That's not small. That's perfect. Elena was exhausted and radiant and entirely ferociously happy in a way that felt almost dangerous given the world they lived in. Do you want to hold her? He took the baby the way he did everything now carefully with the whole of his attention, as if the entire dangerous architecture of his life had narrowed to this single point of gravity. And Elena watched the coldest, most dangerous man she had ever met hold his daughter against his chest and bow his head over her. And she watched a tear fall onto the blanket. And she understood that whatever else the peace had cost, it had also done this. It had given a man who was raised to feel nothing a reason to feel everything. She's out, he whispered. Do you understand? She's out. She'll never sew a man up in a wine cellar. She'll never learn to read her room for the exits. She'll never carry a single secret she didn't choose to carry. He looked up at Elena and his eyes were wet and fierce. I kept the promise. 15 years I couldn't figure out how to keep it. And it turns out the answer was you. My mother wanted one of us to get out. I got her out before she even took a breath. His voice broke. Thank you for all of it. For not letting me walk into that jewel. For being smarter than every man in that hole. For this. She's got your mother's name, Elena said softly. If you want. I thought since you carry it on your arm, maybe she could carry it too somewhere better than a tattoo you got the year you lost her. Julian looked down at his daughter and said the name, his mother's name, and it sounded in his mouth like a promise finally kept and a grief finally healed in the same breath. They named her, and they did not marry in any way the state would recognize because a marriage certificate was a record and records were dangerous. But they married in every way that mattered in a small ceremony at the lake house with Matteo and Rockel as witnesses. And Julian put a ring on her hand that had belonged to his mother and said vows that had nothing to do with families or peace or power and everything to do with the 2 feet of air that had once been the only country either of them was a citizen of and which had now expanded to hold a whole life. The peace held. That was the thing Elena came to understand over the years that followed. The peace held, and it held because of her in a way that no marriage or treaty or truce had ever held it before. The families brought their disputes to her in a discreet office that was neither a clinic nor a courtroom, but somehow both, and she arbitrated them the way she had once triaged a trauma bay, with a cold, clear fairness that belonged to no side. She kept their secrets, and she healed their wounded, and she held their peace. And every one of them knew that the day they broke faith with each other was the day the vault opened and every secret came out at once. And so none of them broke faith. She had become exactly as she'd told them in the hall the terms. It was not the life she had planned. She thought about that sometimes. The ER doctor who was going to save the ones the world overlooked. Now the most powerful unelected figure in the northern New Jersey underworld, a mother and a mediator and keeper of a dangerous peace. She had once built an elaborate cage and called it a calling. Then she had walked out of it into a far larger, far more dangerous one. But this one she had built with her own hands, on her own terms. And she was not alone in it. That was the difference. That was everything. Julian came to her one evening, years into the piece, and stood behind her at the window of the lake house while their daughter slept upstairs, and he put his arms around her and rested his chin on the top of her head, and they watched the light die over the water. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "You could have been just a doctor. You could have had an ordinary life. I could have," Elena said, "and you'd be dead or a killer, and our daughter would never have existed, and 3 families would still be bleeding into wine cellars." She leaned back against him, into the warmth of him, into the danger and the love and the strange dark peace they had built out of the wreckage of everyone's plans. "No, I don't regret it. I found the one version of the future with you alive in it, and your hands clean and our daughter free. Everything else was just the math I had to do to get there." She turned in his arms to look up at him. "I'd do the math again. Every time. Any time." He kissed her, then slow and deep, the cold, dangerous air who had turned out to be hers entirely and forever. And outside the window the water went dark, and the first stars came out over a piece that would hold as long as she held it, which was to say, as long as she lived. Somewhere across the state, in penthouses and mansions and nightclubs, the most dangerous men in New Jersey went about their dangerous business and did not reach for their guns and did not break the truce because they all understood this same simple fact. The doctor held the peace now, and the doctor did not flinch.